Hello, I'm Brenda. This is Write Your Story, and in this video we're going to look at how writing can help us to process grief and trauma. And in going through this process, we can actually start to develop our memoir. What I've done in this video is I've actually taken excerpts from an interview I did with Melody Ann of Author Nation. Now, Melody Ann is the founder of Author Nation, which is a community of authors for authors. So if you want to be a successful nonfiction author, then do check out Melody Ann's website as well as her YouTube channel. The details are also in the description below. But here is the interview with regard to this topic on writing and processing our grief and trauma.
Today, we are talking about working through grief and finding your voice with your writing. The audience may not know but then your mother passed away, and that's what brought you back to writing. So was that a purposeful decision, or was there an impulse to write?
I started moving back into writing before my mother passed away. Then after my mother died, journaling and writing became a tool I used in order to process my grief. And it wasn't just that my mother had died, it was the circumstances around her death that were really traumatic and upsetting for me. And so journaling and writing and putting my thoughts on the page became a way for me to engage with my grief, to process it, to try and make sense of it, to grapple with all my questions. And that's how I started to go back into writing in a more tangible way.
Yeah. And way back then, when you were doing this writing to work through your grief, were you already thinking, oh, this should become a book? Or were you just saying, this is a tool I'm using now?
I had always wanted to write a book. And I always thought, oh, one day I'm going to write a book. I never thought it would be this book. But at the time, it was just a tool. I was just using it as a tool. And then my father's death followed on 22 months after my mother's death because he couldn't cope with my mother's death. It was too traumatic for him. He relied on my mother far too much. My father was an alcoholic. And so the death of my mother just absolutely took the base away from him, and his whole life imploded. And so I had my mother's death and the situation around that, my grief, then my father and all he's playing up and all the drama around that. And I was so far away. And then I did go back and spend some time with him. And this is all part of my book and what's in my book. And so when I had gone through all of that, I'd been journaling through all of this, I realized I wanted to put this into a book. And the reason I wanted to put it into a book is because when we are very much in grief, I find the reason we get stuck in grief is we are afraid of forgetting the person that we love so much, or we're afraid of forgetting what happened to them or how we felt about them and our emotions. And so because we're afraid of forgetting, we can get stuck because we don't want to leave them behind. And we feel that moving on is traitorous, like we're forgetting them, and we don't want to do that. So that's the dilemma of grief. And then if there's been trauma involved in the death of your loved one, as there was for me, and even my father and his death, there's this trauma that happens if you keep remembering it. So you don't want to forget it, but to remember it is traumatic. So I realized that if I could put all of this into a book and on the page, I could have it live outside of me, and I could come back to it and read it and evaluate it anytime I wanted. And it lives there. It doesn't have to live in me. And I can visit it anytime I want to. So I won't forget it. But I don't have the trauma of having to remember it either, because there it is outside of me. So it became a tool for me to survive my grief and to put it on the page that could live somewhere else, so that I could move forward and not stay stuck. And so that really, my book became a lifeline for me. And it was only after I wrote it, I thought, well, maybe it can be of value to some other people. And maybe I should now repurpose it, rewrite it in a different way so that it has value for other people. And that's when it actually now became a book.
But if we can just talk about grief and writing for a little while, how did writing help you through that? Can you tell us a little bit about how you used writing?
Yeah, so I used it to journal. So when I came back to Vancouver, I journaled. I spent a lot of time journaling, raising my questions, answering my questions, being angry on the page. It gave me a place to express this emotion and not just keep it inside of me. So I just piled everything into the book. My anger, like how can this happen? How does this all play out? And so I really grappled with it, and then looked for answers, looked for uh, answers to my questions, including within the Bible. So I put this all together. I worked on it, and I read books. That's the other thing I did, which I touch on as well in the intro to my book, is I just felt inspired to read certain books. And as I read those books from other authors, they really helped fashion and form my thinking and my pain and my heartache and my heartbreak. And so that's how I used the two together. And then I would write out excerpts from those books in my journal, which I also now include in my book, to just try understand where I'm going and what I'm going through and how this is all playing out in my life and what sort of person I want to be coming out of this. And I knew I didn't want to come out of this being an angry, bitter woman. So how am I going to not be that person? And so this is really what writing did for me. It just helped me form and work through a trajectory that just changed my life.
I understand that that first exercise is, dear God, how dare you, and spilling it all out. What are some other exercises or writing activities that you did that then helped move you past just as you said, I don't want to be this angry, bitter old woman. So what are some exercises that helped you move past that into a healthier, more productive anger, if it was anger or joy or whatever it moved into?
It wasn't an exercise so much as in doing this process, I experienced a paradigm shift. And I think what we do is we so often see life through our own focus, our own lens, our own prism. But what struck me was, and this is all part of the paradigm shift I worked through by doing this exercise of journaling and questioning, is what about the people who don't have someone to advocate for them? And there were people in the hospital who didn't have someone to advocate for them because their family couldn't afford to come and be with them in hospital. They couldn't afford to be there and help them. They were totally at the mercy of staff who had little interest in them. And then the stories I heard of what some people have to go through who don't have money, who are poor, really impacted me. And I started seeing that there is a life for other people that is so far from what I expect for myself. And that really wealth does not have to do with how much money you have, but how many choices and options it affords you. And people who don't have money don't have choices. They don't have options. They have to just take what gets given to them, if anything. And so in grappling with this, I experienced two paradigm shifts, but one of them was this one of what is it to be poor? What is it for people who have a harder time than what I experienced with my mother? And so that really shifted me to going, how can I make a difference? My mother dying in a hospital like Joburg General Hospital in the way she did wasn't actually pointless. I felt it was God putting me in a position to pull the blinders off my eyes, to say, this has to hurt you so much so that you can see what other people have to live with. Without it, you would never see it. And so there came this paradigm shift that now has me very passionately involved in trying to make a difference for people who don't have options so that they can have options. And so that's really, I think, how I started to move forward and come out of this grief, was realizing it has a purpose, and how am I going to make it purposeful as I go forward in my life.
So what is the promise of the book?
The promise of my book is that if you know how to engage grief and hard emotions in a constructive way, you will find your way through it and come to the light again and know what it is to live again. And that is the promise of my memoir.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for coming out today and having this conversation. And thank you too for being raw and being vulnerable, because I think it's really, really important that, you know, we talk about writing in a real sense, and we talk about, you know, how it can help us through trauma and grief in a very real way, rather than kind of brushing the surface. So I just want to thank you very much for that.